My name is Emilia Clay, and this is how I discovered that my husband of 27 years didn't just betray our marriage, he tried to steal the company we built from nothing, right out from under me. The day I walked into our bedroom and found him with his pregnant mistress in our bed, in the room where we'd planned our dreams for 3 decades, something inside me didn't just break, it turned to steel. I wasn't just devastated, I was tactical, and that military training, it saved everything. But let me start from the beginning, because the betrayal was so much deeper than just an affair. I was 58 years old. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. And had spent the last 30 years believing I was living the American dream. After serving 2 tours in Afghanistan as a logistics coordinator, I'd come home to marry Judd Clay, a man who shared my vision of building something lasting. Together, we'd started Clay and Associates Consulting from our kitchen table in 1995, with nothing but my military discipline, his charm, and a shared determination to succeed. Those early years were everything you'd expect from a startup. 18-hour days, ramen noodles for dinner, sleeping in the office when we couldn't afford both rent and office space. I handled operations, contracts, and client relations while Judd focused on sales and business development. We were partners in every sense of the word, equal contributors to a vision that gradually, painstakingly became reality. By 2024, Clay and Associates had grown into a mid-sized government contracting firm specializing in military logistics support. We employed 43 people, held contracts worth millions, and operated out of a beautiful facility in the corporate district. The success hadn't come overnight, but it had come completely through our combined efforts. My military background opened doors in the defense contracting world that Judd could never have accessed alone, while his natural salesmanship sealed deals I might have fumbled. We'd built more than a business, we'd built a legacy, or so I thought. Our personal life had settled into a comfortable rhythm over the years. We lived in a custom home in the hills, took annual trips to Europe, and talked frequently about succession planning for the company. No children, we'd tried for years before accepting that the business was our baby. Judd often joked that Clay and Associates was the only legacy we needed. Looking back, I can pinpoint when things started to shift. About 18 months ago, Judd began working longer hours, taking more business trips, and spending increasing amounts of time with the young talent we'd been hiring to modernize our operations. He'd always been naturally mentoring with new employees, especially the ambitious ones, but something felt different this time. The changes were subtle at first. He'd come home later, citing important client dinners or strategic planning sessions. His phone, once casually left on kitchen counters, became permanently attached to his hand. When I'd ask about his day, his responses grew shorter, more evasive. The easy intimacy we'd maintained for decades began to feel forced, performative. I attributed it to stress. The government contracting world had become increasingly competitive, and we were bidding on several major contracts that could determine our company's trajectory for the next decade. Judd had always carried the weight of business concerns heavily, so his distractions seemed reasonable, even predictable. Besides, I had my own pressures to manage. As the operations director, I was overseeing our largest contract to date, a 5-year logistics support agreement with the Department of Defense worth $12 million. The work was complex, demanding, and required constant attention to detail. Military contracts don't forgive mistakes, and I was determined to exceed every specification and deadline. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in October. I'd been in Washington, D.C. for 3 days, meeting with defense officials about contract modifications and attending a veterans business conference. The trip had been productive. I'd secured 2 potential new contracts and strengthened relationships with key military procurement officers. Judd had insisted I take the trip alone, claiming he needed to stay behind to manage a sensitive client situation that required his personal attention. In retrospect, his eagerness for me to travel solo should have triggered my military-trained situational awareness, but I trusted him completely. After 27 years of marriage and 30 years of business partnership, suspicion simply wasn't in my operational framework. I'd called him each evening from D.C., brief check-ins about business matters and travel logistics. His responses were cordial but distracted, always ending with some variation of handle your business. I've got things covered here. Again, nothing that seemed unusual given our professional dynamic and mutual respect for each other's expertise. The flight home was delayed by weather, so instead of arriving Tuesday evening as planned, I didn't land until Wednesday morning. I'd texted Judd about the delay, but received no response, also not unusual since he often had his phone on silent during important meetings. I drove home through familiar streets, looking forward to a quiet afternoon catching up on paperwork before returning to the office Thursday morning. Our house sat on 2 acres of carefully landscaped property, a sanctuary we designed together to reflect our success and provide a peaceful retreat from the demands of running a business. As I pulled into our circular driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar car, a red Honda Civic with temporary plates parked beside Judd's BMW. My first thought was that he was meeting with a potential client or new employee at home, something he occasionally did for confidential discussions. The sight didn't alarm me, just registered as mildly unusual. I gathered my luggage and laptop bag, fishing for my keys as I approached the front door. The house was quiet, which seemed strange if Judd was conducting a business meeting. Usually, I could hear voices from his home office, but today there was only silence. "Judd?" I called out as I set down my bags in the foyer. "I'm home." No response. I checked the ground floor, kitchen, living room, his office. Empty. The coffee pot was still warm, and I noticed 2 mugs in the sink. Definitely a meeting of some kind, I concluded. Probably moved upstairs to the more comfortable seating area in our master suite sitting room. As I climbed the stairs, my military training kicked in without conscious thought. Something felt off, not dangerously so, but enough to heighten my awareness. The house had an energy that was different, charged in a way I couldn't immediately identify. I reached the top of the stairs and heard it, soft voices coming from behind our bedroom door. The door that was never closed during the day unless one of us was ill. What I discovered when I opened that door would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and my business partner of 3 decades. I turned the handle slowly, expecting to find Judd conducting a business meeting in our bedroom sitting area. Instead, I stepped into a scene that made no sense, that my brain couldn't immediately process. Judd was in our bed, propped against the headboard I'd picked out 3 years ago during our bedroom renovation. Beside him, under our Egyptian cotton sheets, was a young woman I recognized immediately. Joy Harlan, one of our newest hires in the business development department. But it wasn't just that they were in bed together. Joy was visibly pregnant, her belly rounded and prominent beneath the sheet she clutched to her chest. She wasn't just some casual affair, this was a woman carrying what was obviously my husband's child, comfortable enough in my home to be lounging in my bed like she belonged there. They both turned when the door opened. Joy's eyes widened with what looked like genuine surprise, but Judd's expression was something I'd never seen before. Not shock, not guilt, but irritation. Like I was the one intruding on something that was perfectly normal and acceptable. "Emilia," he said flatly, making no move to get up or cover himself. "You're back early." I checked my watch, my military precision kicking in even in the midst of shock. "It's 1:15 p.m. I texted you about the flight delay last night." Joy was scrambling to cover herself more completely, finally showing some awareness of how inappropriate this situation was. She was maybe 28, with the kind of fresh-faced confidence that came from never having experienced real failure or betrayal. I'd hired her myself 8 months ago, impressed by her MBA and her enthusiasm for government contracting. "I can explain," Judd said, still not moving from the bed. "You can explain why you're in our bedroom with a pregnant employee?" I heard my voice take on the tone I'd used with subordinates in Afghanistan, calm, controlled, but with an edge that meant business. Joy found her voice first. "Mrs. Clay, I know this looks bad, but Judd and I, no." I held up a hand, cutting her off. "You don't speak, this is between my husband and me." I turned back to Judd. "How long?" He sighed like I was being unreasonable. "Does it matter? How long?" "About a year," he said, finally sitting up straighter. "And before you start with the dramatics, this isn't some midlife crisis thing. Joy and I have something real. something I haven't felt in years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A year, while I'd been managing our biggest contract, traveling to secure our company's future, working 16-hour days to build something lasting, he'd been carrying on with an employee young enough to be our daughter. The baby, I said, looking at Joy's obvious pregnancy. How far along? Joy's hand moved protectively to her belly. 6 months, she whispered. 6 months pregnant. This wasn't some recent mistake or moment of weakness. This was a full relationship, complete with consequences and future plans I apparently wasn't part of. Where did you think this was going, Judd? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice remained. You're having a child with an employee. Our employee. That's what we need to discuss, he said, finally getting out of bed and reaching for his robe. Things have changed, Em. We've changed. Joy and I want to build a life together, and that means making some adjustments to our current arrangements. Adjustments. He was talking about dismantling 27 years of marriage, like it was a minor procedural change. What kind of adjustments? Joy spoke up again despite my earlier instruction. We know this is awkward, but we're hoping we can handle this maturely. Like adults. I stared at her, this young woman who thought she understood complicated situations because she had an MBA and had read case studies about workplace dynamics. Maturely. The house is big enough, Judd said, and I felt the world tilt slightly. You could take the guest wing. Joy's lease is up next month, and with the baby coming, it makes sense for her to move in here. We can all coexist until we figure out a more permanent arrangement. I let that sink in. He wanted his pregnant mistress to move into our home, while I relocated to the guest quarters, like some elderly relative being graciously accommodated. A more permanent arrangement, I repeated. The divorce, Joy said helpfully. We've talked about it, and Judd thinks if you're reasonable about the settlement, this could all work out fairly smoothly. Reasonable about the settlement. This 28-year-old was discussing the dissolution of my marriage, like she was negotiating a contract modification. And the business? I asked, my military training keeping me focused on tactical realities, even as my personal world crumbled. Judd had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable for the first time. That's more complicated. Obviously, we'll need to restructure some things there too. Restructure how? Look, Em, let's be realistic. You're 58. You've had a good run, but the company needs younger leadership to compete in today's market. Joy has fresh ideas, new energy. She's already impressed several of our clients. Fresh ideas, new energy. The company I'd built from nothing, that bore my name, that existed because of my military connections and operational expertise, needed younger leadership. You're suggesting I retire? I asked. I'm suggesting we transition responsibilities in a way that makes sense for everyone, he said. You could stay on as a consultant, maybe handle some of the legacy contracts, but day-to-day operations, strategic planning, Joy's already proven she can handle that level of responsibility. I looked at Joy, who was nodding eagerly like this was all perfectly reasonable. She'd been working for us for 8 months, and thought she was ready to take over a business I'd spent 3 decades building. I see, I said calmly. So you want me to move to the guest wing, while you and Joy raise your baby in my bedroom, step back from running my company so she can take over my responsibilities, and accept whatever settlement you think is fair for dissolving my marriage. When you put it like that, it sounds harsh, Judd said. But yes, essentially, we're trying to make this transition as painless as possible for everyone involved. Painless for everyone involved. I stood there for a moment, looking at the two of them in my bedroom, planning my future without consulting me. Joy's hand resting on her pregnant belly, Judd's confident assumption that I would simply accept this new reality he'd created. Something cold and sharp crystallized in my chest. Not heartbreak, that would come later. This was something more dangerous, more focused. This was the feeling I'd had in Afghanistan, when enemy forces underestimated our position and capabilities. I need some time to process this, I said finally. Of course, Judd said, relieved. Take all the time you need, we're not trying to rush anything. I'll be staying in the guest wing tonight, I continued. To think things through, that's probably best, Joy said, with what she probably thought was compassion. This is a big adjustment for everyone. I nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. Just one question, Judd. The business you said we'd need to restructure ownership. What exactly did you have in mind? He shifted uncomfortably. We'd have to look at the partnership agreement, see what makes sense legally, but I think we could work something out that's fair to both of us. The partnership agreement, I repeated. You mean the one we signed when we incorporated? Right. We'll need to review all of that. I smiled for the first time since walking into the room. Yes, we will. I walked downstairs in a daze, my military training the only thing keeping me upright and functional. 27 years of marriage, 30 years of business partnership, and this was how it ended, with me being told to accept the guest wing, while a pregnant employee took over my bedroom and my company. I sat at our kitchen island, the same one where Judd and I had signed our first client contract in 1995, and tried to process what had just happened. The coffee was still warm in the pot, and I poured myself a cup with hands that weren't quite steady. Everything looked normal, our granite countertops, the family photos from various business events, the company awards mounted on the wall, but nothing would ever be the same. About an hour later, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Judd appeared first, dressed in his usual business casual attire, followed by Joy, who had changed into a maternity dress that was obviously expensive. She was carrying a small overnight bag, which suggested she'd been staying here longer than just today. Feeling better? Judd asked, his tone the same one he used with difficult clients, patient, but slightly condescending. I'm processing, I said carefully. Joy settled herself at the island across from me, one hand resting on her belly, in that unconscious gesture pregnant women make. I know this is overwhelming, Mrs. Clay. When I found out I was pregnant, I was overwhelmed too. But sometimes life takes us in directions we don't expect. The fact that she was sitting in my kitchen, talking to me about life's unexpected directions while carrying my husband's child, was almost surreal. How long have you been staying here? I asked. Judd answered before Joy could. She's been here most weekends for the past month. We were waiting for the right time to tell you. The right time. We knew it would be difficult, Joy said earnestly. That's why we wanted to have a plan first. We've thought this through very carefully. A plan. They'd developed a comprehensive strategy for dismantling my life, while I was focused on managing our largest defense contract. What kind of plan? I asked. Judd pulled out his phone and opened what appeared to be a notes app. We've outlined the logistics. Joy will officially resign from her position at the company to avoid any appearance of impropriety. A little late for that, I interrupted. And then we'll bring her back as an independent consultant, he continued, ignoring my comment. That way there's no direct employment relationship while we sort out the ownership transition. And my role during this transition. Joy leaned forward eagerly. We'd love for you to stay involved. Your military experience is invaluable, especially for the defense contracts. But maybe in more of an advisory capacity. An advisory capacity. In the company I'd co-founded and spent 3 decades building. What about the house? I asked. The house is tricky, Judd admitted. It's in both our names, so we'll need to work out something fair. But in the meantime, the guest wing is completely self-contained. You'd have your own entrance, kitchenette, everything you need. While you and Joy raise your baby in the master suite. The baby will need space, Joy said, as if explaining something obvious. And honestly, Mrs. Clay, this house is so big. There's no reason we can't all be comfortable here during the transition. I stared at her. This young woman, who thought she could reorganize my entire life around her convenience. During the transition to what, exactly? Judd cleared his throat. Let's be honest about where we are. We're both almost 60. We've had a good run, but we want different things now. I want to build something new with Joy. Start a family. You've always been focused on work, on building the business. Maybe it's time for you to enjoy the fruits of that labor. Enjoy retirement, you mean. Enjoy freedom, Joy corrected. From all the stress and responsibility, you've earned it. The condescension in her voice was breathtaking. This woman who'd been working in government contracting for less than a year was suggesting I'd earned the right to step aside and let her take over. What about our clients? I asked. The Pentagon contracts require security clearances that take years to obtain. Most of our relationships are built on my military background and reputation. We've thought about that, Judd said. Joy's clearance is already in process, and she's been building relationships with the younger officers. The military is changing. They want fresh perspectives, new approaches. Fresh perspectives. From someone who'd never served, never deployed, never understood the culture and mindset that made military contracting successful. Have you discussed this transition with our clients? I asked. Joy and Judd exchanged a look. We've had some preliminary conversations, Joy said carefully. Colonel Saul at procurement mentioned that he's impressed with the new energy in our proposals. Colonel Saul was a career officer I'd known for 15 years. We'd served in overlapping deployments and had built a professional relationship based on mutual respect and shared experience. The idea that he was being briefed on management changes without my knowledge felt like another betrayal. You've been discussing company restructuring with clients without informing me? We've been laying groundwork, Judd said, defensively. Testing the waters. Making sure our transition plans would be well received. Your transition plans, Emilia, Joy said, her voice taking on a gentle, almost maternal tone that made my skin crawl. I understand this feels sudden to you, but we've been thinking about this for months. We want what's best for everyone, for you, for us, for the company, for the baby. For the baby. Everything was being justified by the needs of a child who hadn't even been born yet. What exactly are you proposing for the business ownership? I asked, keeping my voice level. Judd consulted his phone again. We're thinking a gradual transition. You could retain a minority stake, maybe 30%, while I maintain operational control. Joy would come in as COO initially, then CEO when I'm ready to step back. 30% of the company I'd built from nothing, and my military contracts. You'd continue managing those as long as the clients are comfortable with the arrangement. Joy said generously. We're not trying to push you out completely. Not trying to push me out completely. How magnanimous. This is a lot to consider, I said finally. Of course it is, Judd said, looking relieved that I wasn't screaming or throwing things. Take your time. But I need you to understand, this is happening. Joy and I are building a life together, and we're having this baby. We can do this the easy way with everyone working together, or we can make it complicated and expensive. But it's happening either way. There it was. The ultimatum beneath all the reasonable language and careful planning. Accept their terms, or face a costly fight. Joy reached across the island and patted my hand. I know I'm young, Mrs. Clay, but I'm not naive. I understand what you built here, and I respect it. I just think it's time for new leadership, new vision. The contracting world is changing, and we need to change with it. She was 28 years old, pregnant with my husband's child, sitting in my kitchen, explaining to me why I needed to step aside from the company I'd co-founded. I need some time alone, I said, standing up. Absolutely, Judd said. Think it over. But he paused, his expression hardening slightly. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. We're trying to be fair here. Fair. I looked at my husband of 27 years, and the pregnant employee he wanted to replace me with. Both of them convinced they were being generous by allowing me to keep 30% of my own company, and live in the guest wing of my own house. I'll be in touch, I said. As I walked toward the stairs, I heard Joy whisper to Judd, that went better than I expected. She seems like she'll be reasonable about this. Reasonable. They had no idea what they'd just done, or who they were dealing with. But they were about to find out. I made it to the guest wing before the full weight of what had just happened hit me. 27 years of marriage, reduced to a real estate negotiation. 30 years of building a business, dismissed as outdated leadership that needed fresh perspectives. My bedroom, my home, my company, all being redistributed to accommodate a pregnant 28-year-old who thought she understood my life better than I did. I sat on the guest bed, a room I'd decorated for visiting family members, and felt something shift inside me. Not the crushing despair I might have expected, but something colder and more focused. It was the same feeling I'd had in Afghanistan, when intel suggested our supply convoy was about to be ambushed. That moment when shock transforms into tactical assessment. Judd thought he'd presented me with a fait accompli. Joy thought she'd graciously offered me a graceful exit from my own life. Both of them assumed I'd be reasonable, that I'd accept their carefully planned transition, because fighting would be too difficult, too expensive, too emotionally draining for a woman approaching 60. They'd made a critical error in judgment. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. Edna Owen had been my JAG officer during my second deployment, and we'd maintained our friendship through the years. After leaving the military, she'd built a practice specializing in business law and military veterans affairs. More importantly, she understood how people like Judd operated, and she didn't tolerate it. Emilia Clay. Edna's voice was warm when she answered. "How's the contracting business?" "Complicated," I said. "Edna, I need legal advice, and I need it from someone I trust completely." Her tone immediately became more focused. "What's going on?" I gave her the condensed version. The affair, the pregnancy, the planned takeover of both my home and business. Edna listened without interruption, occasionally making small noises that suggested she was taking notes. "Son of a bitch," she said, when I finished. "How long has this joy been working for you?" 8 months. "And they want you to accept 30% of your own company? While living in my guest wing and watching them raise their baby in my bedroom." "Emilia," Edna said carefully, "tell me about the original incorporation documents. Who owns what percentage of Clay and Associates?" "We're 50-50 partners," I said automatically. "Are you sure? Have you looked at the paperwork recently?" Something in her tone made me pause. "Why?" "Because if Judd's this confident about restructuring ownership, he might know something you don't. When's the last time you reviewed your corporate documents?" I realized with a sinking feeling that I hadn't looked at our original partnership agreement in years. Judd handled most of the legal and financial paperwork, while I focused on operations and client relations. It was a division of labor that had worked well for 3 decades, maybe too well. "I need to see those documents," I said. "Yes, you do. And Emilia, don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and don't move out of that house. If this goes to court, abandoning the marital home could hurt your position." "What about the company?" "That depends on what the partnership agreement actually says. But either way, an affair with an employee, especially one that results in pregnancy, creates significant liability issues. Sexual harassment, hostile work environment, abuse of power, there are multiple angles we could pursue." For the first time since walking into my bedroom, I felt a flicker of hope. "How quickly can you review the corporate documents? If you can get them to me today, I can have a preliminary analysis by tomorrow morning. But Emilia, I need you to be smart about this. Don't let them know you're taking legal action until we understand exactly what we're dealing with." After hanging up, I sat quietly for several minutes, formulating a plan. My military training had taught me that intelligence gathering was crucial before any engagement. I needed to understand the full scope of what Judd and Joy had been planning, and I needed evidence of everything they'd done. I also needed to secure those corporate documents. The house was quiet when I went downstairs. Through the kitchen window, I could see Judd and Joy on the back patio, heads together over what looked like paperwork, planning their future, no doubt, while assuming I was upstairs accepting my diminished role in it. Judd's home office was just off the main hallway, a room I rarely entered since it was his domain. The filing cabinets were locked, but I knew he kept the key in his desk drawer, a security measure that had always seemed sufficient for home use. The corporate documents were in the first file I checked, organized with Judd's typical efficiency. I pulled out the original partnership agreement, the incorporation papers, and several amendments I didn't remember signing. My hands were steady as I photographed each page with my phone, but my heart was racing as I read. The original agreement was exactly as I remembered: 50-50 ownership, equal decision-making authority, standard partnership terms. But there were amendments, dated over the past 2 years, that I definitely didn't recall seeing before. One amendment, dated 18 months ago, gave Judd sole authority over strategic business decisions and personnel matters. Another, from 6 months ago, established a succession planning framework that essentially gave him the right to restructure management roles as he deemed necessary. Both amendments bore my signature, signatures I definitely hadn't made. I photographed everything, then carefully returned the documents to their proper places. My hands were shaking now, but not from fear, from anger. Judd hadn't just been planning this takeover for a year. He'd been forging my signature on legal documents, systematically positioning himself to control the company while I was busy actually running it. Back in the guest wing, I immediately forwarded all the photos to Edna, along with a message: "Found something interesting. The signatures on these amendments aren't mine." Her response came within minutes: "Holy shit. That's fraud. Don't touch anything else in that office, and don't let them know you've seen these. We need to be very careful about how we handle this." I set the phone aside and walked to the window overlooking the patio. Judd and Joy were still out there, sharing what looked like a celebratory bottle of wine, non-alcoholic for her, presumably. They looked relaxed, confident, pleased with how their difficult conversation with me had gone. They had no idea that their reasonable, mature victim was a decorated veteran who'd survived combat deployments and built a successful business from nothing. They'd mistaken my shock for acceptance, my silence for surrender. Tomorrow I would start gathering evidence of everything they'd done. I would document the affair, the forged signatures, the attempted corporate takeover. I would build a case that would not only protect my interests, but destroy theirs. But tonight I allowed myself a small cold smile as I watched them celebrate their premature victory. They'd underestimated me completely, and that was going to be their downfall. The next morning, I woke at 0530, military habits die hard, and immediately began what I thought of as reconnaissance. Judd and Joy were still asleep, giving me the opportunity to conduct a thorough investigation of my own home and business. First, I needed to understand the full scope of their deception. If Judd had been forging my signature on corporate documents, what else had he been manipulating? I started with our home office, being careful to photograph everything exactly as I found it before searching through files. What I discovered was worse than I'd imagined. Hidden in the back of Judd's filing cabinet were bank statements for an account I'd never seen before: Clay Holdings LLC, established 6 months ago. According to the statements, significant amounts had been transferred from our business operating account into this new entity. Money that should have been distributed as partnership profits had instead been diverted to an account controlled solely by Judd. I photographed every statement, noting that the largest transfers corresponded with payments from our major defense contracts. Judd had been systematically siphoning money from our most profitable work, the contracts I'd secured through my military connections and managed personally. Next, I found correspondence with several of our key clients that I'd never seen: Colonel Saul from procurement, Major Hector Owen from logistics, even General Paul Arthur from the Pentagon contracting office. All had received letters over the past 6 months introducing Joy as the incoming operations director, and suggesting that leadership transitions were planned for Clay and Associates. My military connections, the relationships I'd spent decades building, were being handed over to a woman who'd been with the company for 8 months. But the most damaging discovery was a folder labeled Succession Planning that contained a complete timeline for pushing me out of the company. The plan, meticulously detailed, showed how Judd intended to gradually reduce my authority while elevating Joy's position. The pregnancy wasn't an accident, it was the final piece of their strategy, creating urgency and emotional pressure to force my compliance. I photographed everything, then moved on to gathering evidence of the affair itself. Joy's personal items were scattered throughout the master bedroom, not just clothing, but prescription bottles, personal mail, even baby furniture catalogs. She'd been living here for weeks, not just occasional weekends as Judd had claimed. In Judd's nightstand, I found a key I didn't recognize. It unlocked a small safe hidden behind our bedroom closet, a safe I'd never known existed. Inside were more bank records, jewelry I'd never seen Joy wear, and most damningly, a folder labeled HR protocols. The HR folder contained detailed research on company policies regarding relationships between employees and management, sexual harassment liability, and wrongful termination lawsuits. Judd and Joy hadn't just been having an affair, they'd been carefully studying how to minimize legal exposure when their relationship became public. They'd even consulted with an employment attorney about restructuring management roles to avoid conflicts of interest. Every step of their plan had been calculated to protect them while leaving me vulnerable. By 0800, I had documented evidence of financial fraud, forged signatures, corporate sabotage, and a systematic plan to steal my company. I sent everything to Edna with a message: "This is much bigger than we thought. They've been planning this for months." Her response was immediate: "Meet me at my office at 1000. Don't go to your company office today, and don't let them know you've discovered any of this. We need to move carefully." At breakfast, I maintained a facade of resigned acceptance. Judd and Joy were discussing nursery plans, debating whether to convert my home office or one of the guest bedrooms into a baby's room. They talked around me like I was a piece of furniture that needed to be relocated rather than a person whose life they were dismantling. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," I said calmly, buttering my toast with steady hands. Judd prompted, looking hopeful. "I need some time to review the business documents. Make sure I understand the financial implications of the ownership changes." Joy beamed at me. "That's so smart, Mrs. Clay. I know this is a big decision, and you should feel completely comfortable with the terms. I'll need to take the files to my accountant," I continued. "Get professional advice about the tax implications." Judd hesitated for just a moment. "Maybe I should come with you. Some of those documents are pretty complex." "I think I can handle reviewing my own company's paperwork," I said with a slight smile. "After 30 years, I should understand how my business operates." "Of course," he said quickly. "I just meant if you have questions, I'm here to help." "I appreciate that. I'll be out most of the day, meeting with advisors. But I should have a better sense of everything by tomorrow." After they left for the office, my office, the company I'd built, I gathered the original corporate documents and headed to Edna's law firm. She was waiting with a forensic accountant and a private investigator who specialized in corporate fraud cases. "Emilia," Edna said as I entered her conference room, "what you've uncovered here is criminal. Forged signatures, embezzlement, fraudulent transfers. Judd is looking at serious jail time if we pursue this fully." The forensic accountant, a sharp-eyed woman named Miss Harlan, spread out the bank statements I'd photographed. "Based on these transfers, he's diverted approximately $800,000 from the business account over the past 6 months. Money that should have been reported as partnership income. That's federal tax evasion," the private investigator added. "Unreported income, fraudulent business expenses. The IRS takes this very seriously." Edna leaned forward. "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to let them think you're considering their offer, while we build an airtight case. I want detailed financial forensics, documentation of every forged signature, and evidence of the workplace relationship that created this whole mess." "What about Joy?" I asked. "She's in this up to her neck," Edna said grimly. "Conspiracy to commit fraud, potentially extortion, definitely violations of employment law. The pregnancy might make her sympathetic to some people, but not to a federal judge." The private investigator opened his laptop. "I'll need access to your business premises to document evidence of the affair. Security footage, computer records, anything that shows the progression of their relationship and the corporate sabotage." "I can get you that," I said. "I still have full access as a 50% owner." "Not just 50%, Edna corrected, consulting the original partnership agreement. "According to this document, you and Judd are equal partners, but the company was incorporated in your name first. Legally, you're the senior partner. Those forged amendments don't change the fundamental ownership structure. For the first time in 2 days, I smiled genuinely. So when Judd told Joy she could take over as CEO, he was promising her something that wasn't his to give. Edna finished. He can't restructure the company without your genuine consent. Everything he's planned depends on you voluntarily stepping aside. Which I'm not going to do. Which you're absolutely not going to do, she confirmed. Instead, we're going to systematically dismantle their entire scheme and make sure they face consequences for every law they've broken. The meeting lasted 3 hours, developing a comprehensive strategy that would not only protect my interests, but ensure that Judd and Joy faced justice for their betrayal. They thought they'd manipulated a naive older woman into accepting defeat. Instead, they declared war on a veteran who knew how to fight. Over the next week, I maintained my cover while systematically building a network of allies who could help me expose Judd and Joy's scheme. My military background had taught me the value of intelligence networks, and I intended to use every connection I developed over 3 decades in business. My first call was to Colonel Saul Owen, the procurement officer who'd allegedly been impressed with the new energy in our proposals. I reached him at the Pentagon, keeping my tone professional and casual. Colonel Owen, this is Emilia Clay from Clay and Associates. I wanted to follow up on our recent contract discussions and clarify some communications you may have received. Mrs. Clay, his voice was immediately warm. Good to hear from you. Though I have to say, I was a bit confused by some recent correspondence from your office. That's actually why I'm calling. Could you be more specific about what confused you? There was a pause. Well, the letters suggesting management changes at your company. I've worked with you for 15 years, and suddenly I'm getting communications about new leadership and fresh perspectives. It seemed premature. Premature. You're one of the most competent contractors I work with, he said bluntly. Your operation runs like clockwork, your deliveries are always on time, and you understand military culture better than most officers. Why would I want that to change? I felt a surge of vindication. Colonel, hypothetically, if someone in my company was suggesting leadership changes without my knowledge or approval, what would be your reaction? His tone grew cold. I'd be very concerned about the stability and integrity of that organization. Military contracts require trust, Mrs. Clay. If there are internal power struggles or unauthorized communications with procurement officers, that's grounds for contract review. I appreciate your candor, Colonel. I may need to reach out again soon, with some clarifications about recent communications from our office. My door is always open for you, Mrs. Clay, but not for anyone else without your explicit introduction. After hanging up, I called Major Hector Harlan at Logistics Command. His response was even more direct. Mrs. Clay, I'm glad you called. I was about to reach out to you about some strange emails we've been receiving. Someone named Joy has been scheduling meetings and making suggestions about contract modifications without proper authorization. My staff flagged it as a potential security issue. A security issue? Unauthorized personnel attempting to access sensitive procurement information, he explained. We take that very seriously. I was going to recommend a security review of your company's internal procedures. My heart raced. Judd and Joy's communications with my clients hadn't just been inappropriate, they'd potentially violated federal security protocols. Major, I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss these communications in detail. There may have been some serious protocol breaches that need immediate attention. Absolutely. How's tomorrow at 1400? Perfect. And Major, this meeting should probably include representatives from your security office. Already planned on it. My next call was to our company's longtime accountant, Paul Arthur. He'd been handling our books since we incorporated, and I needed to understand exactly how much money Judd had diverted. Emilia, Paul said, when I reached him, I was hoping you'd call. I've been concerned about some recent financial requests from Judd. What kind of requests? He's been asking for detailed breakdowns of contract payments, profit distributions, even employee salary information. Said he was conducting an internal audit for efficiency purposes. But some of the questions seemed unusual. Unusual how? He wanted to know exactly which contracts generated the highest margins, which client relationships were most valuable, even asked about the tax implications of changing business structure. It felt more like due diligence for a sale than an internal audit. My suspicions crystallized. Paul, I need you to do something for me. I want a complete forensic analysis of all financial transactions over the past year, particularly any transfers to accounts I'm not familiar with. Is there a problem? There may be a very serious problem. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? And Paul, don't mention this conversation to Judd. Understood. Emilia, if there's financial irregularity, you should know that I'm required to report it. I'm counting on that. My final call of the day was to someone who knew both Judd and Joy personally, our office manager Edna Harlan, who'd been with the company for 8 years. She answered on the first ring. Mrs. Clay, I'm so glad you called. Is everything all right? There have been some strange things happening around the office. Strange how? Well, Joy has been acting like she's already in management. Yesterday she tried to give me instructions about client files and asked for access to employee records. When I told her those requests needed to come through you, or Mr. Clay, she said there were going to be some organizational changes soon. What else have you noticed? They've been having a lot of private meetings in Mr. Clay's office with the door closed. And last week, I saw Joy printing what looked like company financial reports. When I asked if she needed help, she said she was working on a special project for Mr. Clay. Edna, I need to ask you something in complete confidence. Have you noticed anything inappropriate about Mr. Clay and Joy's relationship? There was a long pause. Mrs. Clay, I don't like to gossip, but, yes, the way they look at each other, the closed-door meetings, the fact that she's been staying late when everyone else goes home. And she's obviously pregnant. I wasn't sure if I should say anything. You did the right thing by telling me. Edna, I need you to document everything you've observed, dates, times, specific incidents, and if you see any more unusual behavior, please let me know immediately. Is the company in trouble? The company is going to be fine, I assured her. But there may be some significant changes coming soon. After my calls, I reviewed my growing network of allies, military officers who questioned unauthorized communications, an accountant ready to expose financial irregularities, and an office manager who'd witnessed the inappropriate relationship firsthand. Each conversation had revealed new layers of Judd and Joy's deception, but also confirmed that their scheme was more vulnerable than they realized. They'd been so focused on manipulating me that they'd ignored the broader network of professionals who knew and trusted me. My phone buzzed with a text from Edna Owen, forensic analysis complete. The financial fraud is extensive and well documented. We have everything we need for criminal charges. Meeting tomorrow at 0900 to finalize strategy. I smiled, feeling the pieces of my counterattack falling into place. Judd and Joy thought they'd isolated me, made me dependent on their goodwill for any reasonable settlement. Instead, they'd given me time to build an overwhelming case against them, with the help of people who understood loyalty, integrity, and the consequences of betraying both. Tomorrow I would begin the systematic destruction of their carefully laid plans. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't experienced since walking into my bedroom 3 days ago: confidence in victory. They'd declared war on the wrong veteran. By the end of the week, it became clear that Judd and Joy were growing impatient with my consideration of their proposal. What started as polite inquiries about my decision-making timeline escalated into increasingly aggressive tactics, designed to pressure me into compliance. It began with small manipulations. I came home Thursday evening to find that Joy had rearranged the guest wing, moving furniture and redecorating without permission. When I confronted her about it, she smiled sweetly and said she was just trying to make the space more comfortable for my transition. I thought we could make this area more suitable for long-term living, she explained, one hand resting on her growing belly. The baby will need quiet spaces for napping, so I moved some of the noisier appliances down here. She'd relocated the coffee maker, microwave, and small television from the main kitchen to the guest wing kitchenette, essentially creating a separate living space and subtly pushing me further from the main areas of my own home. Joy, I said calmly, this is still my house. Please don't move my belongings without asking. Her expression shifted slightly, revealing a glimpse of something harder beneath the helpful facade. Mrs. Clay, I'm trying to make this transition easier for everyone. If you're going to be difficult about every little adjustment, difficult. Judd appeared in the doorway, having apparently heard our conversation. What's the problem here? No problem, I said evenly. I was just explaining that I'd prefer to be consulted before changes are made to my home. His jaw tightened in that familiar way that meant he was trying to control his temper. Joy is 7 months pregnant. She's trying to create a comfortable environment for herself and the baby. I think you can be flexible about furniture arrangements. Of course, but I'd appreciate being asked first. Asked. Joy's voice took on a sharper edge. Mrs. Clay, I thought we'd agreed that this living arrangement was temporary. I didn't realize I needed permission to make basic adjustments for comfort and safety. That night, I discovered they'd changed the Wi-Fi password and the security system code without telling me. When I confronted Judd about it, he claimed it was a routine security update and seemed genuinely surprised that I was concerned. I'll get you the new codes, he said dismissively. I just forgot to mention the change. But when I tried to use my key card to enter our office building the next morning, it didn't work. The security guard informed me that my access had been suspended pending administrative review. Administrative review of what? I asked. I'm sorry, Mrs. Clay. I don't have those details. You'll need to speak with management. Management of my own company. I called Judd immediately. My access card has been deactivated. That's strange, he said. But his tone suggested it wasn't strange at all. There must have been some kind of system glitch. I'll look into it. Look into it now, Judd. I have a meeting with Colonel Owen this afternoon. About the Colonel Owen meeting, he said carefully. Joy and I think it might be better if I handle that. Given the transition discussions we've been having, it could send mixed messages if you're still conducting high-level client meetings. The audacity was breathtaking. Mixed messages about what? About who's actually running operations going forward. We don't want to confuse our clients during this leadership transition. There is no leadership transition, Judd. I haven't agreed to anything. His voice hardened. Emilia, you need to face reality. This company needs fresh leadership, and our clients need consistency. If you're not ready to step back gracefully, maybe we need to have a more formal conversation about your role. What kind of formal conversation? The kind that involves lawyers and business valuations, and public scrutiny of company management decisions. It was a direct threat. Sign over control willingly, or face a hostile takeover that would destroy my reputation and relationships in the process. I see, I said quietly. I hope you do. I'm trying to handle this quietly, keep it professional, but if you force my hand, you'll what, Judd? I'll do whatever's necessary to protect my company and my family. His company, his family. 27 years of marriage and 30 years of partnership, erased with a few possessive pronouns. That afternoon, I arrived at the Pentagon for my meeting with Colonel Owen, only to discover that Joy had called to reschedule it, claiming I was ill and unable to attend. The Colonel's assistant informed me that Miss Harlan had offered to handle the meeting instead, as the new operations director. I immediately called Colonel Owen directly. Colonel, this is Emilia Clay. I understand there was some confusion about our meeting today. Mrs. Clay, his voice was ice cold. I'm glad you called. I just had a very interesting conversation with someone claiming to represent your company. She suggested that you were stepping down due to health issues, and that she would be taking over client relations going forward. That's completely false, Colonel. I'm in perfect health, and no such management changes have been authorized. Mrs. Clay, I think we need to have a very serious conversation about what's happening at your company. Unauthorized communications with procurement officers, false representations about management structure. This is beginning to look like a serious breach of contract protocol. I agree completely. Could we meet first thing Monday morning? I believe there are some issues that need immediate clarification. Already on my calendar, and Mrs. Clay, I'm bringing our security review team to this meeting. If there are internal conflicts affecting your company's ability to fulfill contracts, we need to know about it. When I got home that evening, I found Joy and Judd waiting in the living room with several boxes and a stack of papers. "We need to talk," Judd said without preamble. "I'm listening." Joy gestured to the boxes. "These contain your personal items from the office. Given the access issues and the confusion with clients, we thought it would be better if you worked from home during the transition period. You're removing me from my own office. We're creating space for a smoother transition," Judd corrected. "The staff is confused about authority structures, clients are getting mixed messages, and frankly, your resistance to change is creating problems for everyone." I looked at the boxes containing 30 years of my professional life, awards, photos, personal files, the things that marked my presence in the company I'd built, and the papers. Joy picked up the stack. "A revised settlement proposal. We've tried to be generous, Mrs. Clay, but your unwillingness to cooperate is forcing us to be more direct." I scanned the documents quickly. 20% ownership instead of 30. No involvement in day-to-day operations. Immediate resignation from all management positions. A non-compete clause that would prevent me from starting a rival company. "This is significantly worse than your original offer," I observed. "That's what happens when negotiations become difficult," Judd said coldly. "Sign this by Monday, or we move to formal dissolution proceedings, and those proceedings won't be private or pleasant." I set the papers down carefully. "I need the weekend to review this." "Fine," Joy said, standing up with some difficulty due to her pregnancy. "But Monday is the deadline. After that, things get complicated for everyone." As they left the room, I heard Joy whisper to Judd, "She's more stubborn than we expected." "Are you sure she'll cave?" "She'll cave," he replied confidently. "She doesn't have a choice." I gathered the boxes they'd packed for me, thinking about their ultimatum and the escalating pressure tactics they'd employed. They'd systematically isolated me from my office, my clients, even my own home, trying to force me into a position where surrender seemed like the only reasonable option. What they didn't know was that every action they'd taken over the past week had provided additional evidence for the criminal case Edna was building against them. Monday would indeed bring complications for everyone, just not the kind they were expecting. Sunday night, I sat in Edna's law office with a team that looked more like a military operation than a legal consultation. The forensic accountant had brought a laptop full of financial evidence. The private investigator had compiled a comprehensive dossier of the affair, and Edna had prepared what she called the nuclear option, criminal charges that would destroy both Judd and Joy professionally and personally. "Let's review what we have," Edna said, spreading documents across the conference table. "Emilia, this is one of the most comprehensive fraud cases I've ever seen." The forensic accountant, Miss Harlan, opened her laptop. "The financial irregularities total $1.2 million over 18 months. Forged signatures on corporate documents, unauthorized transfers to personal accounts, fraudulent expense reports, and systematic embezzlement of partnership funds." She clicked through screen after screen of evidence. "Mr. Clay established Clay Holdings LLC using forged authorization documents. He's been diverting your most profitable contracts into this separate entity, essentially stealing money from the partnership while you manage the actual work." "What about the tax implications?" I asked. "Massive," she replied grimly. "Unreported income, fraudulent business deductions, tax evasion on a scale that will definitely interest the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. We're talking about federal charges that carry serious prison time." The private investigator, Paul Owen, consulted his notes. "The workplace relationship creates multiple liability issues. Joy Harlan was hired as a junior employee 8 months ago. The affair began within weeks of her employment, while she was in a direct reporting relationship to Mr. Clay. That's textbook sexual harassment and abuse of power." "Even if she was willing?" I asked. "Doesn't matter," Edna interjected. "Company policy prohibits relationships between supervisors and subordinates. More importantly, they used company resources to conduct the affair: business trips, company credit cards, even company facilities. Joy's pregnancy occurred while she was being paid by company funds, making it partially a business expense fraudulently charged to the partnership." Paul continued, "I have security footage of them using the office for personal meetings after hours, credit card records showing romantic dinners charged as business expenses, and hotel receipts from trips where Joy accompanied Mr. Clay under false pretenses. The Pentagon meeting is the final piece, Edna said. Unauthorized communications with federal procurement officers, false representations about company management, and potential violations of security protocols. Colonel Owen is furious, and he's bringing DoD security personnel to tomorrow's meeting. I studied the evidence spread before me. 18 months of systematic fraud, documented with the precision of a federal investigation. Every forged signature, every stolen dollar, every inappropriate use of company resources, all carefully cataloged and verified. What are our options? I asked. 3 paths, Edna replied. First, we can present this evidence privately and negotiate a settlement that gives you everything: full control of the company, the house, and compensation for damages. They avoid criminal charges but lose everything else. Second option, we file civil suits for fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. Lengthy court proceedings, but guaranteed victory given the evidence. They'd face financial ruin and professional destruction, but might avoid jail time. And the nuclear option? Edna's smile was cold. Criminal charges for fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. Federal prosecution, prison sentences, permanent destruction of their careers and reputations, plus civil recovery of all stolen funds and punitive damages. I considered the options while reviewing the evidence. Part of me wanted maximum destruction. These people had tried to steal my life's work while I was busy actually doing the work. But another part, the strategic military mind, recognized that complete victory didn't always require total annihilation. What would you recommend? I asked. Start with option 1, Edna said. Give them a chance to surrender completely and avoid criminal prosecution. If they refuse or try to negotiate, we escalate to option 2. If they continue fighting, we go nuclear. How do we present this? Paul Owen pulled out a thick folder. We've prepared a comprehensive presentation for tomorrow's meeting with them. Every piece of evidence, organized chronologically, with clear documentation of laws broken and penalties faced. The key, Edna added, is to make them understand that this isn't a negotiation. We have overwhelming evidence of multiple felonies. They can surrender completely, or they can face federal prosecution. Those are the only options. What about Joy's pregnancy? I asked. Will that complicate things? It actually makes things worse for them, the forensic accountant replied. Using company funds while pregnant with the boss's baby, claiming business expenses for personal relationship activities. It adds fraud and abuse of corporate resources to the charges. Edna leaned forward. Emilia, I need you to understand something. Tomorrow isn't about negotiating a settlement, it's about accepting their complete surrender. They have no leverage, no legal standing, and no defense against the evidence we've compiled. What about my clients, the Pentagon contracts? Colonel Owen has already indicated that he'll support you fully once this situation is resolved. The DoD actually prefers working with established contractors who can demonstrate integrity under pressure. Exposing fraud shows good corporate governance. We spent the next 2 hours rehearsing the presentation, reviewing every document, and preparing for potential responses. By the time we finished, I felt like a general preparing for a decisive battle, one where victory was certain but needed to be executed flawlessly. One final question, I said, as we gathered our materials. How long do you think it will take them to surrender once they see this evidence? Edna chuckled. Based on what you've told me about their personalities, Judd will try to bluster and threaten for about 10 minutes. Joy will realize she's facing federal prison and will want to cooperate immediately. I give it 20 minutes before they're begging for mercy. And if they don't surrender, then we destroy them completely, she said, matter-of-factly. But they will, Emilia. People like this are bullies who fold the moment they face real consequences. As I drove home that night, I felt a calm confidence I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. Tomorrow, Judd and Joy would discover what happened when they tried to steal from a veteran who knew how to fight. They demanded my surrender by Monday. Instead, they were about to face their own. Monday morning arrived with the clarity of a combat mission. I dressed in my most professional suit, the navy one I'd worn to Pentagon briefings, and arrived at Edna's office at 0800 for final preparations. At 1000 hours, we would meet Judd and Joy at a neutral conference room downtown, where their world would end. Remember, Edna said, as we loaded our evidence into briefcases, let me do most of the talking initially. Your role is to remain calm and professional while they process what they're seeing. We arrived at the conference room 15 minutes early, arranging our documents with military precision. When Judd and Joy walked in at exactly 1000, they looked confident, almost smug. Joy's pregnancy was more pronounced now, and she carried herself with the self-assured air of someone who thought she held all the cards. Emilia, Judd said, settling into his chair across from us. I hope you've had time to consider our proposal. The deadline is today. We have indeed had time to consider your proposal, Edna replied smoothly. In fact, we've prepared a counter-proposal that I think you'll find quite comprehensive. She opened the first folder and slid a document across the table. This is a forensic analysis of Clay and Associates' financial records over the past 18 months. Judd glanced at the papers, and I watched his face change as he began to understand what he was looking at. What is this? Evidence of systematic embezzlement, Edna said calmly. Beginning with the establishment of Clay Holdings LLC using forged corporate authorization. Joy leaned forward, studying the documents with growing alarm. I don't understand. What does this have to do with our settlement discussions? Harlan, Edna addressed her directly. You've been participating in a conspiracy to defraud Mrs. Clay of approximately $1.2 million in partnership funds. These documents show your direct involvement in the scheme. That's ridiculous, Judd blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. Those are legitimate business restructuring activities. Edna opened the second folder. These are copies of corporate documents bearing Mrs. Clay's forged signature. We've had them analyzed by handwriting experts, and we have Mrs. Clay's sworn testimony that she never signed these amendments. The color drained from Judd's face as he recognized the papers, the same documents I'd found in his office safe. That's document fraud, Mr. Clay. A federal crime carrying up to 10 years in prison. Joy's hand moved protectively to her belly. Judd, what is she talking about? You said everything was legal. Everything is legal, he said, but his voice was shaking now. This is just accounting discrepancies. Nothing criminal. Edna opened the third folder. Bank records showing unauthorized transfers, credit card statements documenting personal expenses charged to the business, and security footage of you and Miss Harlan using company facilities for personal activities. She slid photograph after photograph across the table, images of them together in the office after hours, at restaurants on company credit cards, in hotel rooms during fake business trips. The affair itself isn't criminal, Edna continued, but using company resources to conduct it constitutes fraud and theft of services. Joy was staring at the photos with growing horror. You had us followed. We documented evidence of ongoing criminal activity, Edna corrected. Which brings us to the most serious charges. She opened the final folder. Tax evasion, conspiracy to commit fraud and violation of federal contracting regulations. Harlan, your unauthorized communications with Pentagon procurement officers constitute a breach of security protocols that could affect national defense contracts. I was just trying to build client relationships, Joy protested weakly. You were misrepresenting your authority and potentially compromising classified procurement processes, Edna replied. The Department of Defense takes that very seriously. Judd finally found his voice. What do you want? Complete restoration of all stolen funds, immediate resignation from all company positions, and full ownership transfer of Clay and Associates to Mrs. Clay, Edna said. In exchange, we won't file criminal charges. That's everything, Joy whispered. Yes, Edna agreed. It is because you tried to steal everything from Mrs. Clay. Judd looked desperately between the evidence and my face. Please. We can work something out. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. I spoke for the first time since entering the room. You didn't make mistakes, Judd. You committed crimes. Multiple felonies over 18 months. Against me, against our company, against our clients. The baby, Joy started, should have been considered before you decided to commit federal crimes. I said coldly, your choices, your consequences. Edna placed a final document on the table. You have 24 hours to sign complete surrender terms, or we file criminal charges with the federal prosecutor. There is no negotiation. Joy was crying now, finally understanding the magnitude of their situation. Judd stared at the evidence that would destroy them both, realizing that their victim had been far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. 24 hours, Edna repeated. Standing, choose wisely. The call came at 0630. The next morning, barely 6 hours after our ultimatum deadline, Edna's voice was crisp and professional when she woke me from the first solid sleep I'd had in weeks. They've surrendered completely, she said, without preamble. Judd called my office at midnight, begging to sign the surrender terms immediately. They'll be at my office at 0800 with everything we demanded. I sat up, instantly alert. Everything. Full financial restitution, complete ownership transfer of the company, immediate resignation from all positions, and signed confessions admitting to the fraud. Joy even volunteered to provide testimony about the unauthorized client communications, if it helps avoid federal charges. By 0800, I was sitting in Edna's conference room watching Judd and Joy sign document after document that officially ended their scheme and restored everything they'd tried to steal. Joy looked exhausted, her pregnancy making the stress even more visible. Judd appeared to have aged years overnight, his confident demeanor replaced by the hollow look of someone who'd lost everything. The house? I asked as Judd signed the property transfer papers. Complete ownership to you, Edna confirmed. Mr. Clay has 24 hours to remove his personal belongings. Miss Harlan's items were already packed and moved to a storage facility. The company accounts? All diverted funds will be returned within 48 hours. Clay Holdings LLC is being dissolved, and every penny will be restored to the partnership accounts before Mr. Clay's ownership is officially terminated. Joy finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Clay, I want you to know, I'm sorry. I didn't understand what we were doing was criminal. Judd said it was all legal business restructuring. I studied her for a moment, this young woman who'd thought she could waltz into my life and take everything I'd built. You're an MBA, Joy. You understood exactly what you were doing. You just didn't think there would be consequences. Judd looked up from the documents he was signing. I know you have every right to pursue criminal charges, but I'm asking for the baby's sake. The baby you conceived while stealing from me. I cut him off. The baby you used as emotional leverage to try to force me out of my own home. Please, he said quietly. I know I destroyed everything between us, but that baby is innocent. Edna interjected before I could respond. Mrs. Clay has agreed not to pursue criminal charges in exchange for complete restitution and cooperation. That agreement stands as long as you both honor these terms completely. What about our jobs? Joy asked desperately. I'm 7 months pregnant, and now I have no income. You should have considered that before committing fraud, I said matter-of-factly. Your employment was terminated the moment you began stealing from the company. We'll provide references that don't mention the criminal activity. Edna added. But only if you both disappear quietly, and never contact Mrs. Clay or attempt to interfere with Clay and Associates again. The final document was a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, preventing them from discussing the details of their termination or the evidence we'd compiled. In exchange, I agreed not to publicize their crimes or actively damage their future employment prospects. Where will you go? I asked as they gathered their copies of the signed agreements. Judd cleared his throat. Joy's family lives in Oregon. We'll figure something out. The Pentagon contracts. Joy asked hesitantly. Are none of your concern, I replied. Colonel Owen has already been briefed on the resolution of our internal security issues. Clay and Associates will continue operating under stable, trustworthy leadership. As they prepared to leave, Judd turned back one final time. For what it's worth, I never wanted it to end like this. You wanted it to end with me accepting 30% of my own company, while you and your pregnant girlfriend lived in my bedroom. I reminded him, this ending is significantly better than you deserved. After they left, Edna and I sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, reviewing the signed documents that officially restored my life and business. How do you feel? She asked. Finally, I considered the question carefully. 24 hours ago, I'd been facing the loss of everything I'd built over 3 decades. Now I had complete control of my company, full ownership of my home, and financial compensation for 18 months of theft and betrayal. Victorious, I said simply, and ready to get back to work. The company should be stronger than ever now, Edna observed. No more internal conflicts, no more unauthorized decision-making, and clients who've seen you handle a crisis with integrity. She was right. Clay and Associates would emerge from this stronger, more focused, and under leadership that had proven its commitment to ethical business practices under extreme pressure. I had walked into my bedroom 2 weeks ago to find strangers planning to steal my life. I was walking out of this conference room as the sole owner of everything I'd built, with my enemies vanquished and my future secure. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply refusing to be destroyed. 6 weeks later, I stood in my completely renovated master bedroom, surveying the transformation that represented far more than interior design. The room where I'd discovered Judd and Joy's betrayal had been gutted and rebuilt, every trace of their presence erased and replaced with something entirely my own. The walls, once painted in the muted beige Judd had preferred, now glowed in a warm sage green that reminded me of my military service in peaceful moments between deployments. New hardwood floors replaced the carpet where they'd walked barefoot, planning my downfall. The California king bed where I'd found them together was gone, replaced by an elegant queen with crisp white linens and a headboard I'd chosen without compromise or consultation. But the most satisfying change was the view from my window. The guest wing where they'd tried to relocate me had been converted into a home office suite, complete with secure file storage for company documents and a conference room for client meetings. I would never again be caught unprepared or unable to access my own business records. Clay and Associates had indeed emerged stronger from the crisis. Colonel Owen's security review had resulted in an exemplary rating and 3 new contract opportunities. The Pentagon's confidence in my leadership had actually increased after witnessing how decisively I'd handled internal corruption. The Henderson Logistics contract came through, my new assistant announced, entering with the morning's priority correspondence. I'd hired Edna Arthur, a former Air Force logistics officer, to replace Joy's position. The difference was remarkable. Competence instead of manipulation, loyalty instead of scheming, professionalism instead of personal agenda. Excellent. What's the contract value? $2.8 million over 2 years, with options for extension. Colonel Owen specifically requested that you handle this personally. I smiled, reviewing the contract details. This single new contract was worth more than everything Judd and Joy had stolen combined. Integrity, it turned out, was incredibly profitable. My phone buzzed with a text from Paul Arthur, our accountant. Q3 profits up 40% from last year. Company valuation has increased significantly since the ownership restructuring. Congratulations. The irony wasn't lost on me. Judd and Joy's attempt to steal my company had resulted in me owning 100% of an operation that was more valuable and successful than ever. Their greed had backfired spectacularly. A knock at my office door interrupted my review of the financial reports. Mrs. Clay, there's someone here to see you. I looked up to see Colonel Saul Harlan, the procurement officer I'd worked with for over a decade. Colonel, what brings you by? 2 things, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. First, I wanted to personally thank you for how you handled the security situation. Your swift action to eliminate the unauthorized communications prevented a potential breach that could have affected multiple contracts. Just doing my job, Colonel. Second, he continued with a slight smile. I wanted to discuss expanding our partnership. The Pentagon is developing a new logistics program that requires a contractor with your specific combination of military experience and operational integrity. Interested? I leaned back in my chair, considering the implications. Another major contract, built on the foundation of trust and competence I'd spent 3 decades establishing. Very interested. What are we talking about in terms of scope? 5-year program, potential value of $15 million. But Mrs. Clay, this would require significant expansion of your operation. Are you prepared for that level of growth? I thought about the question seriously. 6 weeks ago, I'd been fighting for survival, trying to prevent the theft of everything I'd built. Now, I was being offered opportunities that would triple the size of my business. Colonel, I've learned recently that I'm capable of handling much more than I ever imagined. Yes, I'm prepared for that growth. Outstanding. I'll have the preliminary specifications sent over this week. After he left, I sat quietly in my office, looking out at the city where I'd built my life and business. The view hadn't changed, but everything else had. I was no longer the woman who'd trusted blindly, who'd focused so completely on work that I'd missed the signs of betrayal happening under my own roof. I was stronger now, more strategic, more aware of my own worth and capabilities. The crisis had revealed not just my enemy's weaknesses, but my own unexpected strengths. My phone rang, Edna Owen, my attorney, with updates on the final legal settlements. Everything's officially concluded, she reported. The last of the diverted funds have been restored, and both Judd and Joy have honored their agreements completely. You're officially free and clear. Any word on where they ended up? Oregon as planned. Joy had the baby last week, a boy. Judd found work with a small architectural firm, significantly reduced responsibilities and salary. They're keeping a very low profile. I felt nothing at this news, no satisfaction, no regret, no curiosity about their diminished circumstances. They'd become irrelevant to my life the moment they'd signed their surrender documents. Thank you for everything, Edna. I couldn't have survived this without your expertise. You would have found a way, she replied. People like you always do. The question is, what's next for Clay and Associates? I looked around my transformed office, thinking about Colonel Harlan's offer and the opportunities ahead. Growth, I said simply. Significant growth. 2 years later, I stood at the podium of the Veterans Business Association annual conference, looking out at an audience of former military personnel who'd built successful civilian enterprises. The plaque beside me read Distinguished Service Award Emilia Clay, Clay and Associates. When I started my company 32 years ago, I thought success meant building something that would last. What I learned recently is that true success means building something strong enough to survive betrayal and emerge stronger. Clay and Associates now employed 86 people across 3 offices. The Pentagon logistics program had exceeded all projections, leading to additional contracts worth over $25 million annually. My company had become one of the premier government contractors in the region, built on a foundation of integrity that had been tested under fire and proven unbreakable. The audience included several former employees who'd left to start their own businesses, each one mentored personally by me. Real mentorship, based on competence and character rather than manipulation and personal agenda. The greatest victory, I continued, isn't defeating your enemies. It's discovering that you're stronger than you ever imagined. After the ceremony, I drove home to the house that was now completely mine. The master bedroom had become a sanctuary, the home office a command center for an expanding business empire. The guest wing housed visiting clients and potential partners, people who earned their place through merit rather than deception. My phone buzzed with a message from Colonel Owen. Congratulations on the award. Next week's Pentagon briefing confirmed for Tuesday. Potential new program worth $50 million over 5 years. I smiled, setting the phone aside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new battles to fight and win. But tonight, in this house I'd fought to keep, Surrounded by evidence of everything I'd built and rebuilt, I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Judd had moved his pregnant mistress into my bedroom, declaring, "We're taking over now." Instead, I'd taken over everything. Sometimes, the best revenge is refusing to be destroyed and building something even better from the ashes of their betrayal. The house was quiet around me, no longer a battlefield but a fortress. My fortress, my company, my life. All of it earned, all of it deserved, all of it mine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.